All right, we're going. Bienvenue. Welcome once again to the Cladding Matters live stream, a place where we come to talk about things not always about cladding, but more about the effects thereof. And today we've got some wonderful people online to give you more information about what is really going on and some of the major moves that are going on behind the scenes. We have with us Steve Day, of course, of the Building Safety Scheme.org, Hamish McClay of Search Convey, and a welcome new face, Gideon Amos, MP of Taunton and Wellington. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
Now, without further ado, as is traditional on our channel, I'm throwing Hamish mercilessly under the bus.
First of all, apologies for our timing this week, folks. Very good reason for it. However, let's go sort of straight into things, and the least I say, the better in many respects, because it's just a very small part that I contribute within the whole sort of regimen of what's going on in the sort of property industry itself. But what is clearly important is to actually gather people together with the right level of information to discuss something which is such a serious issue throughout the United Kingdom. Trust me, it's not just the United Kingdom either. They have the same challenges in places like Germany, in America, and Australia. And we are actually, people are looking at the UK to see what solutions we are bringing to this. And so far, nothing's happened. And it's great that we now have a working party that is going to do some work with Steve in the sort of House of Lords when the Earl of Lytton scheme does actually sort of start working much more effectively through there. So that's as much as I need to say for the time being. But thank you indeed for joining us today, Gideon, because having particularly just following on from the Lib Dem sort of conference, which was a positive one, particularly in comparison to what we actually saw this last weekend, coming from another party whose name we don't need to mention.
Absolutely not, and we shall never mention it again. Steve, welcome to the show as ever. Now, what is all this going on behind the scenes? What is happening? Why should we be joyous?
Well, I mean, the problems with building safety are well known, and I think where we are in our campaign is we've established a need for consumer protection for building defects. And it's been absolutely wonderful. So I've stood as a Liberal Democrat councillor candidate previously, and I really do think that the Lib Dems have a really strong message here on building safety and leasehold reform, and it was wonderful to be at the conference to be able to speak a tiny bit on the building safety part of that motion that went through, which I'm pleased to say passed, and we are going to be working with the Earl of Lytton and Gideon's team on looking at some ways we may be able to help with the upcoming planning and infrastructure bill. Basically to do two things. One is to reform the partial remediation standard, PAS 9980, which is allowing banned combustible material to remain on existing high-rise buildings. So my question is, you don't have to be a fire engineer to say if it's banned on new buildings, why is it allowed on existing? Something's wrong there. And it obviously condemns people to permanently high insurance. So we're looking at addressing that. And also the other part is the excluded leaseholders under the Building Safety Act. 1.7 million people, as per the National Residential Landlords Association, are currently uncovered by the Building Safety Act and shouldn't be responsible or liable for ruinous bills because of the failures of the construction industry. So it's those two specific areas, but Gideon's team and the amendments put forward, the motion put forward at conference really goes even further and looks at the scourge of leasehold reform as well. And, I'd maybe go over to Gideon now and get your thoughts on the motion and any specific areas you would like to bring out for us today.
welcome, Gideon. It's lovely to have you on the channel. I am absolutely amazed. We finally got the both houses working in concert.
Absolutely.
Well, that would be great, wouldn't it? Let's hope we can make that work.
I don't know what I've been smoking, but it certainly seems that both houses have a common interest and are actually talking with each other. Wonderful that the Commons are actually taking notice of this properly.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are some members of us who are, keen to try and move this whole agenda forward and work with peers and across parties to make that happen. But yeah, I mean, Steve is absolutely right. We've got a legacy. Not just of unsafe buildings, but also an unfair system in terms of leasehold. And, Lloyd George, Liberal Prime Minister back 100 years ago, called it blackmail. Whether you go that far is your own decision, but charging these, enormously high ground rents has been a long-standing issue and bugbear. We know Labour governments say they're going to reform that. We are chasing them to get on with that. It's 100 years too late, to be honest. So we need to get away from this sort of feudal leasehold system generally. We also want to see, and beyond, this is beyond building structures, of course, we want to see much fairer approaches to all the estate management charges that often freeholders have to pay for their homes. They end up buying a home, the small print doesn't seem like a big deal to them, some sort of management company, they sign up to it, and then they find they're forever after locked into a landowner of the land adjoining their home, over which they have almost no control, and are paying sometimes extortionate charges. So, totally unfair. Basically, what we're coming down to is there's a massive rip-off of people going on in the property sector in this country, and it's time that people at the receiving end were given a fairer deal, rather than all the advantage going to the landowners underneath the system. So, as part of that whole panoply of issues we want to address, building safety and cladding, of course, is one of them. Steve's absolutely right. We don't think that the current Building Safety Act and PAS 9980 goes far enough in terms of the people that would be compensated. We need a system that really rescues people who are trapped in unsafe buildings without any recourse to modify them and to remediate them.
Wow, Steve, you seem to be on the verge of hitting a home run here.
Well, I wish it was as simple as that, but Gideon knows that it's all about getting parliamentary support, cross-party, working together. I think part of what we'll be doing is trying to justify with the ability to basically analyse how rich the builders are, how much money they've got. And we were looking at their net assets, and we looked at the top 5 just briefly before the conference. There's 5 billion a piece of net assets. There's a large amount of land banking in that, which we're going to strip out as part of analysis. We've also looked at the cladding manufacturers, and they're also very well capitalized. So there is serious money there for us to look at, to levy the wider construction industry levy. And we can also levy at different rates. So Daniel Greenberg, the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, before he took that role, helped us for free to draft variable rate levy clauses for, I think it was Leasehold and Freehold Reform Bill at the time. And so we have the legislative power to do that. One of our supporters, David Sawtell, he's an amazing lawyer, worked on the Grenfell inquiry. He's been advising us on these clauses too. So we've got 2 really great legal minds that have already looked at how we would address that in legislation, and it's government parliamentary council grade legislation, which is quite handy. And also we'll be looking at our policy approach justification, because when we're trying to convince parliamentarians, they need to understand that this is a problem that will affect the entire industry. And we heard from the Earl of Lytton a couple of weeks ago about valuation, about the future of home ownership and so on. If you take out, and mistreat an entire tenure of building, and against people that don't have the money as well, they're often shared owners caught up in the leasehold scam. And all kinds of people that are very vulnerable financially. They should be protected, and it all comes down to consumer protection. And we'll be justifying all of this as part of the lead up to the debates for the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, working with Gideon and his team and the Earl. So quite exciting, and I think it's a meaningful change. I think all parties need to come together on this, because I think after Grenfell, 8 years, they're even taking the tower down now. Isn't it time that we all had justice, all had safety, all had all of our defects covered, not just the cladding, and no more watered down standards? That's an affront to the victims of Grenfell, to have a standard that allows banned combustible material to remain on existing buildings when they're banned on new. So it's going to be a really exciting time ahead. I've got my policy team of people coming for the whole weekend to work in a pub in Woolwich to get all of this done. I'll be buying breakfast, and we'll have a nice briefing pack for discussion later on when we meet in our group.
Gideon, it appears to me, and further discussion, I don't know if you've caught up with any of the shenanigans that Steve and I have put together, musics and videos and lyrics and so on, but it seems to me that when we went through all of that, that one of the biggest revelations was that when you take the cladding off, it seems like there's been this rampant disregard for any kind of safety standards in building these things. It seems to be endemic.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty worrying actually that we've ended up with putting in a new Safety Act regime because we couldn't rely on the building regulations that should have been doing the job already.
Right.
We've ended up with a building research establishment that tests materials, which was working for commercial advantage, and we've ended up with building inspectors who were doing the same thing. Net result, we have a system that was more profit driven than safety driven,
Effectively
and
marking their own homework.
their own homework, and that's an indictment of the last few decades in terms of building regulations, building acts. We need to get an independent inspection regime back. I don't think it can stay in private sector profit making hands a moment longer. The government hasn't gone quite that far, but Martin Morbick's report on the Grenfell disaster pretty much went as close as he possibly could go to saying, you really cannot make building safety inspections a profit-driven exercise. And surely that must be obvious to everyone. So we made that point in Parliament when the report was published, and we'll be making it again at any possible legislative opportunity. When I trained as an architect many years ago now, I reported to the building inspector at the local authority. He was not biddable on the amount of money he or she was being paid, and that's the way it should be. So frankly, we need better.
Yes, I think your phone has lost its way somewhat.
I can step in.
No, leave it there. That's fine. Leave it vertical. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Well, look.
Don't know what happened there.
That's all right. In the iniquities of modern data networks, I think. Now, Steve, it appears to me that much as people like me on the peripheries might be celebrating these minor victories, it will become a Pyrrhic one if we do not get some actual concrete movement and agreement that is cross-party.
Yeah, we need. I mean, the appeal is for all of our viewers watching this, parliamentarians, industry professionals, and so on. I think. Given the fact that we've had large defect rates, 77% being the largest one for one of the developers, of blocks of flats that put your life in safety critical risk, according to the government statistics. I mean, that really is appalling. And if that is seen as something that can continue, then we have not only a legacy issue, but we have an issue going forward, and a large issue. And so all we're doing is saying, well, you're going to be accountable with liability. The levy will get you if you do this, and no one is excluded. No builder can get away with it. And I think that's the only language I'm afraid capitalistic companies understand.
Yeah, we need more levies than American Pie, do we not? Now, look, what I was going to say is that one of the travesties of all of this, of course, is all those buildings that are not covered because they're simply not tall enough. And there's a large number of those that have exactly the same issues, but under the current scheme wouldn't get a look in. Am I right?
Well, we addressed that. So that's one of the 1.7 million excluded leaseholders. So that is going to be funded. We think via a wide construction industry levy, which we will work out. We're not saying that's that solution yet. We're working together on this, and we'll hear from from other parties as well outside of our group, just to get a buy-in on that. But we think it is the industry that caused the problem. We can levy a variable rate so we don't put anyone out of business. We can ensure the developers pay a fair share, given they're already contributing to the contracts via the other schemes. So we don't have to levy them as high as maybe the cladding manufacturers who've largely got away with it. So there's various things to discuss, and what we want to do is focus on the outcome. The people need to be protected if they are living in defective flats due to corner cutting, due to unlawful construction, and they need to be made safe. That is the outcome, and that's basically where we need to get to. And one last part is, I don't know, Gideon, if you'd heard from Dr. Al Pinkerton, but he's actually been highlighting in the Commons fraud on the fire risk assessment. So WS1 is a shocker because it really highlights a conflict of interest where a fire engineer represents the liability on the construction industry for huge sums, millions of pounds on remediation. So you've got two fire assessments, fire risk assessment external wall, which really does let the builders off, and under PAS you can use that conflict of interest to use PAS to justify leaving a load of flammable material on a building. So that's come out. And then EWS1, which is every 5 years you've got to get this form, which basically says the external wall is an A1 or a B1, and if it becomes a B2 then you need more remediation and so on. And I don't know what your thoughts are maybe on fraud in the industry, because that's shocking.
I mean, you're right. My Lib Dem colleague Al Pinkerton has highlighted this, and I believe at least one inspector's been struck off as a result. It's a real scandal, and it's just like the building inspector making judgments for profit. Again, it just cannot be right. I just wanted to emphasize that as Lib Dem housing spokesperson, obviously I'll advance this as much as I can in Parliament, but I want to stress that I'll be working cross party. We are our job, we see it as constructive opposition. That means working across parties in Parliament to actually make real change happen. And it is about the people in their homes who are left high and dry by this process, who are the ones that matter here. Sometimes we are able to highlight things and put them on the agenda in Parliament before anyone else has done, and begin to spur government and other parties into action. So that is what we'll be aiming to do, both with the planning bill that's coming back to the Commons shortly that Steve has mentioned, and also the leasehold and freehold reform bill that is expected to be introduced before Christmas.
If I could just put one final spoke into the wheel, and perhaps even throw a spanner into that spoke. The next government is due to go to the polls again in 2028, is it? Or this government, yes. So therefore, theoretically, even if we get this all across the line and everybody signs up to it and hurrah, theoretically it could all go up in a puff of logic in a few years' time.
It's possible. I mean, 2029, the Parliament can run to, and obviously, as ever in this country, the Prime Minister can choose when to go to the polls. I would hope that and I think there's some evidence for complex areas of law like this, which are can't be revisited frequently.
Right.
The legislation does tend to stand across different parliaments. The flip-flopping, just my observation, tends to happen on some of the the bigger ideological issues. And I mean, for example, if we got in, the Lib Dems got in, we'd be wanting to rejoin the European single market, for example. I'm sure that the other governments wouldn't want to do that, though there are big differences on that sort of thing. But I would like to think that when it comes to building safety, and people's liability, we can build enough cross-party support so that it would be enduring legislation. That's got to be what we aim for.
Marvelous.
What a day that will be, Gideon. What a day that will be.
Let's work towards it anyway.
As is traditional, I'd like to give Hamish McClay the chance to sum up. What are your thoughts, sir?
Well, really, it's very positive side. And I think one of the most important things that Gideon did mention is the fact that we're looking to do something across parties. It's not just, it isn't somebody who happens to be in a Lib Dem area, for example, who is suffering from this. There are people throughout the United Kingdom and England and Wales act in slightly different ways, but we could be a lead for the rest, not just for this country, but for many, many others. And it's only the start of. There's just so much to be done, and not just because of the fact that we're actually going to be doing the podcast, but because it is important. In a couple of weeks' time, we've actually got somebody coming on board, not on the cladding matters, because our major focus will tend to be towards the cladding, but it's the building safety issues generally. So on our other sort of podcast, we're bringing in, and it'll be a week after next, we'll have coming in to speak about building safety in general, because that's what they do. They go out and inspect buildings. And the following week, we're going to have one of our well-known sort of colleagues speaking about the sharing issue, which is, if we think that basically the leasehold side of things is bad news, when you see what sharing is about, anybody that's caught up with the cladding issues, with the safety of their property, and they're actually sharing the ownership, it is absolutely horrendous.
Which show will that herald on?
Well, that will actually be on Tuesday, but we will actually call it, one of them will be building safety issues. So will
that be under construction matters? Yes.
Well, after construction matters, we've got construction matters next week, building safety matters the following week, and property sharing matters the week after, I guess. But they are so important. They do need to be discussed, and it's just absolutely great that we've got Gideon here to explain things that are getting up. They're going to be discussed in both sides of our, if you like, so both houses of Parliament, as well as us keeping the momentum up, and hopefully we can actually get to others to join in this conversation, because it involves so many people throughout the country, and we really want something to happen on their behalf. And like Gideon suggests, we don't want to be waiting for years for this to happen. It should have happened already. 8 years.
Yeah.
8 years.
Well, 8 years where there's been a pox on both houses, as a quote, and now that pox appears to be removed or being removed. Many thanks for your attendance, Steve Day from the Building Safety Scheme, of course, Hamish McClay of Surgical Bay, and thank you so much for attending, Gideon Amos, the MP for Taunton and Wellington, and all of you out there. Thank you so much for continuing watching as we promote this Goliath type fight, and hopefully we will see the David win through over time. I believe it will happen. I absolutely have confidence in the actors within. And to all of you out there, please keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and look after your mental health. Until next week, goodbye.
There's a tale about some folks with hammers and some nails. They'll polish you the moon, but their word always fails.